Selfishness. It's a terrible word, isn't it? People recoil when they hear it. Nobody wants to be accused of being selfish. We're all taught from childhood that if you want to be good, you have to be altruistic. Acting for your benefit is morally tainted. Acting for the benefit of others rather than yourself is morally virtuous. Almost everybody believes today that selfishness is the epitome of evil. But is it? We're going to take an honest, fresh look at this idea of selfishness and see whether it is, in fact, the epitome of evil or is actually the opposite. What's the common view of selfishness? Well, if you ask almost anybody, they'll tell you selfishness refers to an amoral predator, someone who feeds off the blood of others, somebody who victimizes other people in pursuit of his ends, say a swindler like Bernard Madoff, or a brute, a killer like Attila the Hun. Selfishness in people's minds stands for somebody who is willing to lie, to cheat, to kill in order to gratify his own desires. Okay? Now, let's ask whether this is a valid interpretation of the concept selfishness. What does the term mean? Selfishness. It means being concerned with yourself. It means caring about your life and your well-being. Well, what about all the people who do that? What about all the people who care about their lives and their well-being, but do so without victimizing others? What about, let's say, a student who spends his time studying hard rather than partying? Or what about an athlete who trains tirelessly in order someday to become a champion? Or an inventor who dedicates himself to getting rich by devising a better mousetrap? Or an artist who devotes himself to creating a work that fully meets his independent standards? Now, all these people are selfish, aren't they? They're pursuing their own goals. They're trying to improve their own lives, but they're not doing it at the expense of others. These are all selfish people. Why then shouldn't the concept selfishness denote this kind of behavior? We need a concept to refer to people like this who are pursuing their self-interest without victimizing others. Well, our political and intellectual leaders do not want us to view selfishness in this way. They don't want us to consider selfishness as being something other than destroying people in your path. While it's obvious that there's a difference between a producer and a predator, between, let's say, a Warren Buffett and a Bernard Madoff. That is, between somebody who makes money and somebody who steals money. There's a clear difference between the two, but our leaders, the advocates of altruism, regularly blur that distinction. They don't want us to acknowledge the difference. Instead, they have this, fuzzy package deal in which selfishness, pursuing your self-interest, is equated with the destruction of others. They tell us that it's a moral crime to be a parasite feeding off others. Therefore, it's a moral crime whenever you pursue your own interest. The two are lumped together. Which leaves us with the only choice of either we act altruistically by sacrificing ourselves to others, or we act, quote, selfishly by sacrificing others to ourselves. We're given only this false alternative. Be like Mother Teresa, who humbly sacrifices herself in service to others, or be like Attila the Hun, who viciously sacrifices others in service to himself. And what about the category of people who thrive, who pursue their goals without being a predator? No such category, according to the altruist. That category does not exist. So if selfishness should be defined as the pursuit of your self-interest rather than the pursuit of your interest by destroying others, if that's the case, the question arises, what actually constitutes your self-interest? I mean, self-interest can't mean do whatever you feel like doing. There are many desires people have that are clearly against their interests. Alcoholics, drug addicts, masochists, serial killers, they're all following their desires, but they're patently acting self-destructively. So, if we understand that life has objective requirements, so that we can't swallow anything we want and satisfy our nutritional needs, and similarly we can't pursue any desire more generally that we feel and achieve our overall interests. We can't do that because there are certain facts about human life and about nature that tell us some things are harmful to us and some things are helpful to us, regardless of our wishes. So, is there some basic course of action that advances our lives? Is there one type of action that will advance and sustain our lives in a fundamental way? And the answer is yes. What is that? A commitment to rationality. Why do I say that? Well, because unlike animals, which are programmed for survival, we're not. We don't have automatic knowledge. We need to eat in order to live, but we're not born knowing how to hunt animals or how to plant crops. How then do we acquire this knowledge? By means of reason. By looking at reality and deciding this is true or this is false, this is good, this is bad. Reason means accepting the facts of reality and abiding by them. And that's a choice. We don't have to do it. We need to choose to do it. So, if you're faced with a choice, for example, you know that you have to eat. Should you work to sustain your life, or should you just sit passively and wait for manna to come down from heaven? Let's say you're sick. Should you go and find a doctor, or should you seek out some faith healer? Or let's say you encounter the opportunity to risk your life savings on the roll of a pair of dice. Should you follow your intellect and decline, or should you trust your horoscope, which tells you today is your lucky day? These are the kinds of choices we always confront, and they're the choice of going by reason or by unreason, accepting reality or defying reality. Non-thinking is destructive of life. Life requires thought. Non-thinking leads to death. So non-thinking, irrationality, is the basic way in which you harm your interest. And conversely, going by reason is the fundamental means of advancing your self-interest. The whim-driven Attilas of the world are acting in contradiction to their long-term interests. To be selfish, in other words, is to be rational. And to be rational is to understand that the individual ought to live by the reasoning of his own mind and by the products of that reasoning. When he deals with people, therefore, he disavows the antithesis of reason, which is force. The selfish individual deals with others by persuasion, not coercion, by trade rather than by theft. The genuinely selfish person does not live by expropriating the efforts of others. He does not live as a parasite. He does not become a dependent upon the efforts of others. He lives an independent life. He rejects the idea of seeking the unearned. Instead, he deals with people by offering value for value to mutual benefit. He does not sacrifice himself to others, nor does he sacrifice others to himself. Okay, so we've covered what selfishness really means, and we've covered what you have to do if you genuinely want to achieve your self-interest. Let's look now at the alternative of altruism. Now, the common view of altruism is that it tells us don't prey on other people, don't trample over them in pursuit of your goals, respect people's rights, act benevolently, help old ladies cross the street. And this is supposed to keep us from one another's throats. It's supposed to result in a harmonious society. But if you look more closely, the reverse is true. Because what does altruism actually demand of us? Well, it tells us to subordinate ourselves to others. It tells you to place others above yourself. In any choice you make, you're supposed to regard someone else's needs, someone else's interests, as more important than your own. If someone lacks something that you have a duty to provide it to that person. So, no matter how diligently you may have worked to earn your money, every dollar that you spend on yourself rather than on meeting the unfulfilled needs of others is an immoral choice. And there is always somebody somewhere with unfulfilled needs. Altruism, in other words, tells you you must live to serve others. That is your purpose in life. Let's look at a couple of real-life examples to concretize this. So, let's say you're an industrious high school student. You finished your 4 years of learning, you've gotten excellent grades, you're preparing to get into a good college, you work at several part-time jobs to save money for your future. Then you're told you can't get your diploma. Why? Because you haven't fulfilled the requirements that today most high schools have, which is that you have to spend significant time performing so-called community service. So you will be told that unless you spend your time, you take your time away from your studies, take time away from preparing for your future, and go, let's say, to some hospital to change the bedpans there, unless you do that, you will not qualify to graduate. So you have to demonstrate, you the student have to demonstrate a willingness to sacrifice yourself. You have to show you don't just care about yourself, about your own life. You're willing to put that aside for the sake of helping somebody who needs his bedpan cleaned. Or let's take another example. Let's say you're an ambitious worker. You've been doing a good job. Your boss is very satisfied with you. You're expecting a promotion, and you're told you're not getting it. It's going to someone else. To whom? Well, to someone who belongs to a, quote, disadvantaged class. So, while in fact you deserve the job, you deserve the promotion rather, the other person needs it. And need, according to altruism, is always the overriding consideration. So, your boss gives the promotion to the other person, you lose out, and maybe you lose out on your job too. That is what altruism demands of you. Now, keep in mind that it is not generosity that altruism requires of you. Generosity is a gift and is perfectly compatible with a rationally selfish individual. What altruism wants is the payment of a debt, an unchosen moral debt that you owe to others. Let's say your neighbor's house burns down. It's perfectly appropriate for you as a non-altruist to choose to help him out if you can. Maybe you want to bring him a hot meal or give him a spare cot. Why would you do this? Well, because you value your own life, because you value the fact that you're a human being, you also value other human beings because they share the same basic nature as you and potentially share the same basic values. You will do this even to strangers. You may give them help. You may show genuine, non-sacrificial goodwill towards them in circumstances where they are innocent victims of some misfortune, but you don't do it as a duty. You don't regard yourself as having an obligation to do it. It's your time and your money, and you decide whether or not you can spare it. And the recipient needs to be grateful for whatever help you provide. But you don't harm yourself in doing it. You wouldn't, for example, starve yourself so that he could have some food. You wouldn't let your children go homeless so that his children can be sheltered. And if someone is undeserving of your help, let's say some alcoholic in a drunken stupor burned his own house down, and maybe will burn your house down next, you would not choose to help him. Altruism, though, says you should. Altruism says sacrifice. You must harm yourself for the sake of others. Your money and your time are not yours. And if someone is undeserving of help, if he burned his own house down, that doesn't matter. What does matter is his need. That is the only consideration you have to take into account. The person in need is entitled to your help. You owe it to him. So whenever there's a situation where there's need, wherever somebody, let's say, takes out a mortgage and can no longer afford the payments, you are made to subsidize it. If someone has no health insurance, you are made to subsidize it. If there is poverty in Bangladesh, you are made to send out foreign aid because people in need have a moral claim against you. That is what altruism dictates. And the cause of someone's need is irrelevant. Even if the person in need is himself the cause, is the perpetuator of his troubles, you still have a duty to help. So if some food stamp recipient spends all his time studying the racing forms rather than the help wanted ads, you have to help him. If some homeless man uses the money that he panhandles for to support his crack addiction, you must help. If you think that these people don't deserve your help, and they don't, altruism says that makes it an even greater sacrifice on your part. And the greater the sacrifice, the more imperative it is that you perform it. The question of whether to help somebody in distress, some innocent victim of some misfortune, that is window dressing for altruism. The real question is, do you have a moral duty toward others? Is need a moral claim against you? Do you have a right to exist for your own sake, or is the justification and purpose of your life only to serve others? Those are the two basic alternatives. And as a result, altruism leads society to be divided into two classes. One class consists of people with needs, and the other consists of people who are able and therefore obligated to satisfy those needs. You can see that this kind of arrangement results not in harmony, not in social harmony, but in perpetual conflict, perpetual unresolvable conflict between these two classes. Now, at this point, if you're starting to wonder what could possibly justify such an irrational idea, well, nothing can. The entire code of altruism can be refuted with one word. The word is why. Why should you be shackled to the needs of others? Why shouldn't your life be your own? To this, there is no answer. There is no rational explanation for why man should consider himself a sacrificial animal. And no answer has ever been given. Okay, that's what altruism is. Now, let's return for a moment to selfishness, because, there are many distortions about what selfishness is. And if we want to be selfish, we should be sure that we understand what selfishness fully entails. And among the many distortions about it is the idea that the selfish person is crudely materialistic, that he can't derive any pleasure from spiritual values, such as friendship or love, because there's no cash value to it. This is the view that the selfish person lives as a misanthrope and as a recluse, alone in his dusty attic, counting his money over and over. That's the selfish person's value on this view. Now, if you think about it for a moment, it's clear that there is a vast benefit to you in having a friend or a lover. You choose relationships with people who are important to you. You choose to give your affection to those who mean something to you. Now, if you heeded the altruists and actually tried to give your love indiscriminately, if such was even possible, which it isn't, you would indeed be acting unselfishly. To love a stranger or an enemy is indeed an act of self-effacement. But genuine love is not selfless. It is not dispensed as alms. Consider the absurdity of declaring that you love someone not because of anything worthwhile in him or her, but purely as an act of charity. It's an absurdity because love is given not in pity, but in response to a person's value to you. And as a result, it offers you an exquisite joy. To love your spouse, to love the person with whom you wish to spend your life, to love the one who embodies the things you treasure most is an intensely personal, selfish choice. And it's only the disgraceful misrepresentations of altruism that could make someone regard love or any positive human relationship as self-sacrificial. Okay. So, we've explained selfishness, we've explained altruism, we've explained aspects of selfishness. Now let's deal with a serious objection raised to this. And you've all heard this, namely that maybe it's okay to pursue your self-interest at times, but at other times you have to sacrifice your self-interest for the public interest. So there are times, in other words, where you must subordinate your own interests for the sake of a so-called greater good. Is this a legitimate point? No, emphatically no. What is the public interest? Think about that. What is the public interest? Now, it's a deliberately vague term. It's a term that has no clear definition. We're told something like, well, it's in the public interest if it benefits society as a whole. Okay, that's a nice cliche, a nice bromide, but a bromide is not an explanation. What is the public interest? Who is the public? And how are its interests determined? If the city takes over some land as a park, everybody says that's great, that's the public interest, we're happy. If that same land is used, let's say, for a shopping mall, that's a private interest. Why? If we have a national museum, that's in the public interest. If instead we have a private movie theater, that's in the private interest. Why? Don't people benefit from the shopping mall or the movie theater? They willingly patronize those things. They certainly believe they get some value for it. So what distinguishes a private interest from a public interest? Well, you may say the answer is numbers. A public interest project benefits many more people. Is that true? Well, let's see. Yellowstone Park, is that in the public interest? Yes. It's publicly subsidized. About 3 million people a year visit Yellowstone Park. Disney World, private. How many people do you think visit Disney World a year? 45 million. Okay? Or take television. We have public television, which supposedly serves the public interest, and it has a primetime audience of just under 2 million households. Private commercial television has an audience 40 times as large. So why, again, what is the basis for this distinction? In other words, why are you part of the public when you visit Yellowstone Park, but part of the non-public when you visit Disney World? Why? And there's only one answer. The distinction between the two is the distinction between charity and trade. It's the distinction between the unearned and the earned. A public interest project is by nature non-commercial. The costs are not intended to be covered by paying customers. If they were, it would become commercially viable. So even if, let's say, a museum charges some admission fee, it's a nominal fee and it does not and is not meant to cover the costs. The, quote, public pays the costs. Now, when you visit a private project, if the standard is self-interest, then the user pays for what he gets. He pays because he values it. When you go to Disney World, every person who goes there decides he is getting a benefit that is worth the price. And those who think it's not worth it don't go. They don't pay. There's no conflict. Everybody benefits. Nobody loses. But in a public interest project, the link between the user and the beneficiary is severed. Users benefit without paying, and non-users pay without benefiting. That is the hallmark. That is the defining characteristic of a public interest project. And that is the purpose of a public interest project, so that some people are made to sacrifice for the sake of others. So who is the, quote, public when it comes to the public interest? It's all the people who insist that they be provided with something that is not being willingly offered to them in a free market. You know, like some infant throwing a tantrum, they want their wishes accommodated because of the absolutism of their need. So if you want to act on the basis of self-interest, and you want to obtain what you seek from others voluntarily by trade, well, you must subordinate yourself to the so-called interests of the public. Whereas, if instead you want to obtain something through the sacrifice of others, then you are the public. You become the public, and your needs must be satisfied. When they talk about the interest of society as a whole, remember that the public is not some disembodied entity. It is not some undifferentiated mass existing apart from the individuals within it. The public is those individuals. The assertion of a clash between public and private interests is meaningless. The only clash is between some individuals and other individuals, between those who want something without having to pay for it, and those who don't want it and don't want to have to pay for it. It's the continual clash inherent in the code of altruism. So is there any legitimate meaning to the term public interest? Well, no, if it's supposed to refer to something underived from and opposed to the individual's interest. But yes, if it refers to the actual interest of each individual who lives in a society. Because an individual's interest is identifiable. We could say, well, the individual's self-interest lies in not leeching off others, in being productive, in pursuing rational values, in dealing with others voluntarily through mutually beneficial exchange. That defines the individual's interest. Okay, what then is the one basic value politically? The value that is in the interest of all? Freedom. Individual liberty is the common denominator of everyone's interests in a social setting. Those interests are furthered not when government creates and provides us with these parks and museums and railroads that are supposedly in the public interest, but rather the individual's interest is furthered when the government recognizes that he should be able to choose whether or not to create or to patronize these parks and museums and railroads. Freedom is in the interest of the public because, and only because, it's in the interest of each individual who makes up that public. What is altruism's view on this? Altruism has a very different position on the value of freedom. And this brings me to my final point tonight. Freedom means that the government does not have the unrestricted power to do whatever it wishes to people. However you define freedom, in whatever realm you think it applies, it means that the individual within that realm has autonomy. It means that he acts by his choice, not by the edicts of the government. It means that the individual has rights. But according to altruism, you have no autonomy. Since you must subordinate yourself to others, you cannot be an independent, sovereign being. You are a servant to others. And a servant has no rights, only duties. He submits to the wishes of his master, in this case, the collective, and to the state that is the representative of the collective. The ethics of egoism leads to individualism, to freedom, and to capitalism. You have rights because each person's life is an end in itself. But altruism leads to collectivism and to statism because each person's life is only a means to the ends of others, to the ends of society. The culmination, the final expression of the doctrine of self-sacrifice is a totalitarian state in which the self is eliminated. It's a system in which there are no selfish values, no private profit, no individual rights. It's a system in which everything and everyone is subordinated to the wishes of the collective. And Karl Marx put this very succinctly. He named very aptly the altruist morality underlying the fully communist state when he said, from each according to his ability, to each according to his needs. That is altruism, and that is totalitarianism. Selfishness, rational selfishness, is good because the life of the individual is good. Your life, and it's the only life you have, your life should be precious to you. You should not be obligated to surrender it to the wishes and the demands of others. Not to your neighbor, not to your community, not to your whole society. Your life is yours, in other words, and you have a moral right to live it. Thank you very much. Okay, we'll take questions for a while. Do I need to repeat the questions, or?
If everyone could please go to the microphone right at the center stage behind this gentleman in the blue, that'd be terrific.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Hi. I very much appreciate your opinion on selfishness. My question is, I come from a Christian model, and how do you mesh or rationalize religion with your opinion of selfishness? That is, Jesus is the ultimate service person, okay?
Yes, right.
So how do we mesh this together?
Okay, what do you think my answer will be?
Well, it'll be something like, I don't believe what Jesus says.
Not something like that at all, but that exactly.
Okay.
Not to be flippant here.
Oh, no.
You're right. In other words, you name a very important connection. Religion and altruism go hand in hand for a number of reasons, but religion, let's put it this way, religion essentially demands that you be a servant to God. In other words, religion says don't rely on yourself, don't rely on your own judgment, on your own mind, don't pursue what you think is good for you, give yourself up to God, do what He tells you. Be a servant to God. And that is just the other side of the coin of the more secularized altruist version, which says don't pursue your own interest, don't be the one deciding what is good for you, obey society, submit to the demands and the needs of the collective. So you're right. Religion does not tolerate self-interest. Religion and altruism go together, and in fact, in the West, certainly, the real development of altruism, where self-sacrifice became a virtue, I think was largely a result of the inauguration of Christianity. That's what started this idea, and it's become secularized, but it's the idea that self-sacrifice is a virtue is compatible with religion. The idea that self-interest is a virtue is not.
So do I have to choose between the two?
I'm afraid you do. Sorry.
That's a slippery slope for
Slippery
Christians.
Well,
Thank you very much.
okay, you're welcome. And I hope you make the right choice.
Great talk, Peter.
Thank you.
I'd just like to bring this to a practical level. My concern
what?
is that to a practical level in communicating these great ideas to the public. Unfortunately, the left has been so successful, so incredibly successful in dumbing down our civilization that the level of intellectual, I don't want to say intellectualism because that sounds rationalistic, but intellectual discussion is almost non-existent. I think anybody who has an open mind and just a little bit of intelligence would listen to your conversation and think it's very well thought through and would not be opposed to it at all. The trouble is they hear the word selfishness and immediately demonization.
Right.
So on a practical level, it's great to get in here and we all sit together and see clearly here, but on a practical level, how do we win this war?
Okay, well, it's certainly true that the intellectual level of society, largely because of the educational system that we've had for so many decades and generations here, is deteriorating. There's no question about that. But that is not an insurmountable obstacle. There are intellectual arguments being made all the time in books, in newspapers, in articles, in movies, in schools. It's not that people are, the leaders tell everybody, just do what I tell you, I don't need to give you any reason, and they just blindly obey. They're indoctrinated with the idea of altruism and with other philosophically harmful ideas. And the way to combat that, the only way is to offer offer correct philosophical ideas to these people. To put it on a more practical level, here's what I would assure you of. If people took the opportunity to speak up and challenge these accepted views, particularly about altruism, that are in our culture every day, if you spoke up against it, you will undermine the opposition. You may not see the results right away, but even if it's a letter to the editor or an op-ed article that you get published in a small newspaper or whatever forum is open to you, if they see that there is an intelligent opposition to the dominant ideas of the culture, they will be undermined. Because remember, what is it that gives them the supposed confidence and the self-assurance that they exhibit? It's not because they become rationally convinced of their ideas. They're not rationally convinced. They're irrational ideas. They go along because what gives them the self-assurance is not being challenged. It's that everybody just accepts it. And for so long, before Ayn Rand, no one did challenge selfishness, really. So you've got the opportunity to raise questions and to show these people that you don't agree, and you don't agree, and you don't agree. And if they start seeing and hearing enough voices, you will start making inroads. I mean, it's important that they know that there's an opposition out there. That is the first step towards eventual success, I think. So good luck.
We just need a lot more courage, I suppose. Thank you,
sorry?
sir. We just need a lot more courage.
We need courage, and we need a commitment to doing this because there's no other way to do it.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much for the talk.
You're welcome.
So my question is, when discussing morality and selfishness and altruism, in particular, when you say somebody is trying to be selfless,
Yes.
I often find that people have no real sense of what it means to have a self to begin with. So I'm curious, what is your definition of self in the discussion?
Well, if you want a terse definition of it, if you're trying to explain to somebody what it is, tell them it's essentially their mind, the ideas and the values that they regard as true and as good, fundamental ideas and values. That is their self. And explain that self-interest, therefore, means doing what you think is good for you. It means not surrendering your mind and not surrendering your interests. If you focus the self on the essential consciousness of a person, on the essential ideas and values they hold, I think they will get the concept. Okay?
Do you find that difficult in terms of communicating with somebody when you say they lack a self?
Well, when you say they lack a self, you really mean they lack an independent mind. You can't give somebody an independent mind, but the people that you need to be concerned in arguing with are not just these blind sheep who will do whatever anybody tells them. They're just, they're the flotsam and jetsam of society. I don't know if that's a right metaphor or not. Probably not. What you want to do is reach the people who are the advocates and the theorists and the endorsers of altruism. The people who write columns every day and who write editorials every day. They have a mind. It's a distorted mind, and it's a badly functioning one. But, and as I said to the previous questioner, get them to see that there is an opposition, a rational opposition. And the more voices that can be mounted in support of that kind of campaign, the more they will be undermined. Okay?
You touched on this briefly, but I want to explore a little more. What do you say to the person who says, I understand that you have an obligation to yourself, but you also have an obligation to others, and that your first obligation is to yourself, but your second obligation is to others, that you need some sort of a balance. The Hillel
Right.
formulation, if I do not love myself, who am I? If I do not love others, what am I? How do you respond to that?
I think that is a common objection raised, and it's in large part a manifestation of the whole pragmatic philosophy that infects our society. You have to get people to try to understand this. Tell them anytime they have to make a choice, whatever it is, they've got to choose whether, in this situation, do I have a right to pursue my own life for my own sake, or do I have a duty to sacrifice that life, to sacrifice my interests for others? In every situation, it's got to be one or the other. You can't say, well, you do half and half. But I'm faced with this situation. My mother wants me to stay home with her and entertain her cousins and nieces and nephews to show me off. I need to study for an important test I'm going to have tomorrow. And if I don't study and I fail the test, my future will be in serious jeopardy. I mean, that's not the best example, but you could come up with a better one. The question is, what is his obligation? It's no answer to say, well, half to yourself and half to others. Which course you're going to choose? Now, what happens is that people sometimes decide on one basis and then on another situation decide on another basis. But that's only saying that they're acknowledging a contradiction. So you can't, in a decision rests on one premise or another. And if you show them that they really do, if they understand what should be done, and you show them that the proper decision really rests on the idea that your life, you have a right to your own existence, then you just tell them, okay, if you think it's right in that situation, then the same premise will apply in the next situation, rather than doing something harmful to yourself one time and beneficial another time. It's like, following a proper diet one day and then gorging and eating whatever you feel like the second day. That's exactly the same thing.
So they're not entitled to a cheat day.
Yes.
I've
In other
done
words,
all this.
if you acknowledge that this is good one day, why isn't it good the second day? And the only thing you could say, well, I'm harming myself. Okay, but then at least acknowledge you're harming yourself and you have no reason to harm yourself. Okay?
Thank you.
Okay.
So with respect to the practical goal of persuading people to act more rationally self-interested, right? I keep being struck by the idea of an underlying motivation, right? Like what would be more attractive about the prospect of not being rationally self-interested, right? And the one thing that comes up for me is the idea of envy, right? Wanting what someone else has, the desirability for the outcome of theft versus producing something yourself.
Right.
So what do you think about that? Sort of attacking it on that level, because it's like there's like this basic underlying motivation of this attractiveness of this outcome that they're feeling, and then maybe you have arguments that are used to rationalize it after the fact.
I don't know if I quite understand your question. Are you asking whether it's a good idea to attack altruism by attacking what you think underlies altruism, namely envy?
Yeah.
Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, in terms of like,
Okay.
the practical goal of persuading people, hey, look, there's another way you can operate here. You don't have to be focused on, this. Yes, it may seem attractive to pursue something that is essentially theft, right? Rather than producing something.
Yeah, well, that is not a good way to make your case. What you need to do is to persuade the person that he does not have a duty towards others. If he's honestly earned what he has, then he's honestly earned his a nice house, a nice car, whatever. He does not owe that to people who haven't earned it. That is the fundamental thing you've got to get across, that he has a right to his own existence. He doesn't have to sacrifice himself simply because others need what he has. Then you can go further and say that, and I have a whole chapter devoted to this in the book called The Goal of Self-Sacrifice, where you want to try to explain or analyze what is it that motivates the hardcore advocates of altruism, the real theorists who understand what altruism really means. And it is similar to envy. It is the idea of sacrifice for its own sake. That would be the desire to see others destroyed, the desire, which is what envy essentially means. But that applies only to the real hardcore theorists. The normal person in society who accepts altruism will be persuaded by showing him that altruism requires you to be a servant to others, and that there is an alternative that does not entail being Attila the Hun. That's where I think your central argument should focus on.
Well, I think there's like two sides to it, right? There's the person who accepts altruism, right? That accepts their role of servitude to provide for the needs of someone else. Right. But then there's the other side of it, of the people who are desiring of the benefit of that need, to be the beneficiary of it. So there's like two sides to it. So to sort of attack it on the side of the envious.
But you see, I see what you're saying.
To eliminate the...
I see what you're saying, but it's that is really a non-essential, because it's no argument to say, well, I grant you that I have a duty to provide for your needs. However, let me try to talk you out of accepting that sacrifice because you're being selfish. That's what it amounts to. And what I'm saying is that you've got to get the premise of servitude out. If you grant that premise, then it's perfectly understandable that you would desire to collect the sacrifice, because I've earned my money and you haven't. So I have a duty to you and you have no duty to anyone. You're not earning anything. The altruism says the earned must be sacrificed to the unearned. The earned is bad, the unearned is good. I'm bad, you're good. So there's no way to say, well, you shouldn't desire my stuff. Why shouldn't you desire my stuff? I have a duty. You are entitled to it. You're morally entitled to it. Why shouldn't you desire it? So you've got to attack the idea of servitude and moral duty. Okay?
So the role of altruism in Christianity is easy for me to see. It's so glaring. Jesus on the cross suffering for others, for lesser people. To your knowledge, what is the role of altruism in Judaism?
I think any religion embraces altruism in a fundamental way. And it's because, what I indicated earlier, religion as such demands a basic sacrifice. It demands the sacrifice of your mind. Religion says, don't go by your own judgment, don't go by your own reason, have faith. That's the essence of religion. What is faith? Faith is sacrificing your mind, sacrificing your convictions, sacrificing your pursuit of the truth for the sake of what's, some spokesman for some divine entity tells you should do. So sacrifice is built into every religion, not only religion, any doctrine that upholds faith over reason is an advocate of sacrifice. Now, it doesn't really matter then whether what the specifics of the sacrifice are. Doesn't mean you have to help the homeless guy in the street or not. Most religions, as far as I know, all the religions that I know say yes. They say you are insignificant. You are simply a vessel of God. So if you've managed by God's good graces to have something worthwhile, to have a nice income, you must give it away to those who haven't been so fortunate. So however you look at it, there's no way around the fact that religion and sacrifice go hand in hand. Okay? And that, you have a question? Okay.
Well, my question was about relationships, how you would take this philosophy to relationships. I think I'm in an altruistic relationship with my teenage daughter right now. I feel like I am the worker and she's the non-worker, and I feel there's things that she owes me for that. I'm seriously relating this to my real life.
Well, okay.
If I was to say, hey, stay home and play with your cousins, and she said, oh, I have to study for my finals, I can't. That's okay. But then, I'd like you to keep your room clean. This is my house. I've worked for it. And she's like, I want my room dirty. This is how I like my room. Right. So I'm struggling with the relationship aspect of this.
Okay, well, your question in one respect really is not a philosophical one. Let me address what I can about it. First, I should make clear that the relationship between a parent and a child, not your specific relationship, but generally between a parent and a child, is not an altruistic one. Does not involve sacrifice, because as a parent, you voluntarily choose to have a child, and you know that having a child means a certain responsibility, that the child can't take care of himself or herself until he or she is grown up, and therefore it's your obligation to do that. Just like you undertake a debt, you borrow money, you're obligated to pay it back. You've accepted it. Now, up to a certain age, obviously, till they become grown up, not for the rest of their lives. So you've got a teenager who's on, I don't know what age she is, but if she still is young enough that she has to live at home, can't take care of herself, then the question you're asking is, how do I set certain rules that I can get my child to obey? You want to tell her to clean her room and she says no, so you feel that she's feeding off you without giving anything back. I think you have to remember, you still hold the upper hand. It's your house. What are you going to do? What's she going to do if you lock her out? No. Well, in a relationship, in a normal relationship, apart from a parent and a child, where it's a relationship between equals, a husband and a wife, let's say, whatever, or friends, it's a spiritual exchange. Each one benefits from the relationship. There's no sacrifice. It's not that I don't get anything out of my wife, but I'm going to stay married to her out of pity to her. So there's a trade, but it's a spiritual trade. And you stay in that relationship for as long as you mutually benefit. If you don't, you could end the relationship. You can't with your child because, as I say, that's one that you've undertaken a certain responsibility for. But otherwise, it's a relationship between equals, and it's exchanging value for value. And you decide, yes, I want to help my wife be happy, and my wife wants me to be happy. There's a constant mutually reinforcing relationship there, but it's not self-sacrificial. Okay, I have answered all your questions, is that right? Okay, you now know everything you should know. As Matthew announced before, if you want to come in the back, I'll sign books for any of you, and I'll announce what I always announce at these signings, that since I've reached an age where memory lapses are allowed, if I know you and don't remember your name, don't take it personally. Okay, so thank you very much.